If we're looking at preventing either an acute or an overuse injury, there's many different approaches we can take, whether that's stretching, foam rolling, icing, or strength training, but are any of those actually effective in reducing our risk of injury? Acute and overuse injuries occur when the load placed on the tissues exceeds what it can tolerate. For example, if we're doing a max deadlift and the max that we can lift is 300 pounds, but we load 450 pounds on the bar, then we're at an increased risk that we're going to stress one of the tissues, such as one of the muscles in the low back. Similarly, if we generally run 10 miles per week, but then on Sunday we decide to run a marathon, our tissues don't have the tolerance for that kind of load. A recent systematic review published in the British Journal of Sports Medicine looked at strength training as a means to reduce the risk of acute and overuse injuries. The study included 7,738 participants with their ages ranging between 12 and 40 years old. The key finding was that increasing the volume and the intensity of strength training sessions helped to reduce the risk of suffering a sports injury. Specifically, they found that increasing the reps performed by 10% resulted in a 13% reduction in relative risk of injury. If we take a step back and look at the results of this study and put it in a broader context, essentially if we can increase the tissue's tolerance to loading, we can decrease the risk of injury. So the greater tissue tolerance we can build through strength training, the greater margin we have so that we don't exceed the tissue's tolerance. And this lends well to the work by Tim Gabbett on the acute-chronic workload ratio. So an acute workload is basically a workload of a single session. So that's typically like one game or a single run. Whereas a chronic workload more represents your fitness level. So that's over a period of time, usually about 4 weeks. What Tim Gabbett found was that spikes in acute workload for athletes relative to their chronic workload resulted in an increased risk of injury. So if we can increase their chronic workload through strength training, that means we can build a more resilient athlete, and that way we'll decrease the risk of injury. An interesting point when we look at that original article on strength training and injury prevention was that the average weight that they used in those programs was about 8 repetition max, which means that it was the most weight that they could lift 8 times. And when we look at strength training for endurance athletes specifically, there's a tendency to use higher reps. And so what this article basically says is that we might need to actually load heavier with less repetitions to get the body to adapt in the way that we want it to, so that way we can minimize the risk of injury. Of course, there are many factors involved with injuries, but when we look at what are the most effective options for decreasing the risk of injury for an athlete, strength training seems to be the most effective one. And so if we're looking at building a robust and resilient athlete, our emphasis should be on strength training. Thank you for watching this video on strength training and injury prevention. I hope that you found this information useful. If you did, go ahead and give this video a big thumbs up. And if you want to see more of my content, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, which I think is down. It's down over here. It's the red button, but if it's over here, just go ahead and click that red button. And if you want to be notified of future videos, go ahead and hit that bell as well.